Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and for this week in our 34th episode we will be taking a look at Lotus Turbo Challenge 2. But as always, before we jump right into that, I thought we'd have a look at a couple of news items. Now the first up isn't really Amiga related, but it sort of is in a roundabout sort of way. But a couple of programmers have managed to port Eye of the Beholder over onto the Commodore 64. Now, if that isn't mind-blowing enough, just the fact that you could even get something so much 3D with so much detail onto the actual C64 is amazing itself. I mean, I did Dungeon Master many episodes. Was that episode 5? I think it was. It might have been episode 6. But the point is, it was an absolutely fantastic game. It was so detailed. It's a bit like, say, it's like getting Doom back on over to the Amiga. It's that sort of an effort over on the C64, and it just absolutely blew me away. And from what I can see on the details of it, there's a few guys behind this: Mick Backlund, Iker, Jostet. You guys by now, I'm sure you know I'm fantastic with putting down people's names. Oliver Lindau, Lars Verhoff, and Linus. But yeah, it looks absolutely fantastic, and there's a video up at the moment. I will put a link into the show notes, but you can get a bit of blurb about that over on indieretronews.com, which again, that's a fantastic news site, especially for Amiga related stuff. Next up was something I noticed the other day on the oldschoolgameblog.com. Basically, Flashtro have finally released a full working version of Alcocopter. Now what this is basically like is a little copter flying up, down, left and right, and you have to like get things back to a base. It's puzzle related, but it's nice and simple, and it looks like a really fantastic fun little game to play. I think I played a demo of this last year, but anyway, it's fully available, and I will stick a note into the show notes. Now, as a bit of an aside, as of next week, will be the 23rd of June, I will be attending something called the Super Retro Games Fair. I'm really looking forward to this. It's up in Leeds. I think it's in the university. Looks absolutely fantastic. I've been to like retro gaming market fairs before, but I'm going to be going there to keep an eye on all sorts of games. I've recently picked up, I've said before, a Sega Game Gear and a Sega Nomad. So I'm trying to get my hands on more like Mega Drive and Game Gear games. But as always, I will be keeping an eye out for the odd box copy of some Amiga games. I'm still after Last Crusade, but in a decent condition with all the innards and stuff inside, and I might try and get the other Monkey Island games as well. Anyway, that's just an aside, but I'm really looking forward to it, and if I can, I'll try and come back with some sort of report when we next record an episode. With that out of the way, it's time to move on to this week's game. And for this week, not for any particular reason, I've gone with Lotus Turbo Challenge 2. Now, this is mainly off the back of I was trying to find more interesting linkable games that I could play on Amiga Live with Dan from Lemon Tube Amiga, so I'm quite happy to say he did help me out a great deal again. We spent a couple of hours playing through this as much as possible and just having a good time for it, and of course you can see the YouTube footage. But anyway, getting over to the game, it was published by Gremlin, and they were responsible for games like Disposable Hero, I think that's quite popular. Harley Quinn, I think I've had a request for that recently actually to cover it, and I think it's a very bizarre colour, the coders were on drugs sort of platformer, so it's probably one I will tackle. Little Divil, that was a very, I can't think of it, it's like cartoon characters, that's a weird 80s style, a Dungeons and Dragons style type animation. Premier Manager series, I mean, those were just God knows how many games of those they had. And a massive list of Gremlin games, but just some of the ones that caught my eye at close attention. It was developed by Magnetic Fields. Now, they were responsible for the entire Lotus series. Now, there was 3 from what I could see. It seemed to stop at the Amiga, but that might be me. I don't really look much further past the Amiga's history. They also did Supercars 1 and 2, so straight away I'm sure you can see that in good hands here. A game called Wrangler, I'm not even sure what that was. MF Tanks, that seems to be like a tank shooter, and again a huge list. They didn't do too badly with the games. It came out in 1991, and surprisingly it is just on 1 disc. As a game, this is quite popular and seems to be very well known. I think a lot of it comes down to the the multiplayer aspect. And it was one of the early Amiga racing games, so I thought something like that would be on like 3 or 4 discs, a huge thing. But no, it's just a single floppy. It's capable of running up to 4 players. That did surprise me, actually. I only realised that after I've been playing it. I'm not entirely sure how you could have 4 players running on this, because looking at the options it only showed 2, but there was something about linking systems. So unless you've got an Amiga on one screen and then an Amiga on another, and then it's like cross-linked that way, very bizarre. And it'd be interesting to see how that actually could play out. I mean, I haven't got any way of testing it anyway, but it did catch my attention. It was priced at $24.99, which seems to be about the average for games at this time. The coding was done by Sean Southern. Now, he was behind games like Kid Chaos, both Supercars games, all the Lotus games, and something called Cosmic Kitten, which is a pretty odd title compared to the rest that he'd done. The graphics, Andrew Morris was responsible. Again, he worked on Kid Chaos, all the Lotus games. So that's Lotus Elite 1, is it? I don't know, Lotus Elite. Number 2 were on now, and just Lotus 3. And both of the Supercars games. Music was done by Barry Leach. I think we mentioned him before, actually. I don't remember the name. He was behind games, the music, such as games on Hero Quest, Lethal Weapon, Sleepwalker, Silkworm. So lots and lots of licensed stuff and very popular Amiga games. His library is pretty intensive for what he's actually done. And some of the other music was also done by Sean Southern, so he pretty much had his hands in everything. Now, the game itself is a take on a typical classic 2D arcade racer. Now, when I was looking into this, there seems to be a bit of rivalry and competition going on between these guys and Core, because Core were responsible for something called Jaguar XJ220, and from what I could see, they seem to have ripped the design pretty much off the Lotus games. And I've got this vague memory. I've read somewhere that there was a big rivalry going on between the two houses, and some accusations might have gone back and forth, but I couldn't really find anything about that. And I did try digging in different places. So if I haven't mentioned that, I've got that a bit wrong. By all means, you know the usual places. Either come to the Facebook page or drop me a line on the Twitter account. Keep in mind that this was around about the time when licenses were still pretty new for like products and video games, because they weren't really a done thing, and this did have the official Lotus licensing on, and I found this very odd when I was looking into it, but Lotus would not let them damage any of the cars, and I can understand that on the 3D type games, because you don't want like, a replica of your car being smashed up and damaged, because it'd look terrible. But on something like a 16-bit Amiga racing game, I thought it was very, very odd. So because of this, and it is something I'll mention later on, there's no sort of damage to the vehicle whatsoever. It seems a bit of an odd one. Now, Andrew Morris was, from what I read in an interview, he was actually given full access to the Lotus cars at the time. So the Espirit, did I call it the Elite before? I think I almost did. And the Lotus Elan. And from what I could tell in an interview, he was saying that he actually got a chance to drive them all around about 145 miles an hour on a racetrack. I'm sure that's something that a lot of the more recent programmers go through as well, but this guy was just responsible for the graphics, so I would have expected them just to let him film a couple of videos and maybe have a wander around, but no, they actually threw him in one and let him go speeding around like crazy. And because it was the sequel, and they seemed to be quite pleased with the first one, they let him play with the Elan, and that got tied into the licensing. I also found out that Lotus themselves were so pleased with the work that they'd actually done with the graphics and music and the way everything worked together, and the fact it was actually quite a good seller. Afraid I couldn't get any selling numbers, but back at their headquarters, they installed an Amiga pretty much in the reception area, from what I could tell, and visitors could call in and actually play the game and see it in action. I mean, at the time, if you think about it, it sounds crazy. This is like an Outrun style racer, but it was state-of-the-art graphics back then, especially for racing games, the early 90s and stuff, so you can sort of understand why they'd be so proud of it. Of course, with it being a sequel, it pretty much had more courses than the original game, and from what I could tell seemed to be a first. It was the first racing game, I believe, with proper weather effects, which actually affect the driving. Now, I couldn't confirm that 100%, but from what the interviews and reviews were saying at the time, it seemed to be the case. So, you know, quite a good first, especially for a British game. And you know, these sort of effects were pretty groundbreaking. You're not getting that sort of thing unless maybe, no, then even again the arcades would have just been completely different. Despite being a licensed game, it didn't seem to appear on too many systems. It was converted to the Atari ST and the E, the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis. I mean, that did interest me, actually. I'm assuming like the music and with the drivability and the arcade sort of racing action, it probably made it an ideal console game, but I did find it very odd that it didn't appear over on, say, like the Super Nintendo or 3DO or anything like that. There didn't seem to be any sort of expansion beyond that. I'm not sure what happened. Seeing as it got a third game as well, it seems like the ideal sort of game for it. There's also a version on the Acorn Archimedes. Now, I'm not very familiar with their games at all, so I might actually have to go and have a look at that and just see how it actually came across, especially with the music, because I'm not sure if the Acorn was that well known for doing this degree of music, you know, if it had the chipset or was even more than capable enough. There's probably Acorn Archimedes collectors now screaming at me on the other end going, oh my god, this is what are you talking about? The Acorn's a fantastic system. I'm afraid I don't know. It's probably something I should look at in the future. With this being a racing game, of course, there's no actual story. The manual is pretty much bare basic, straight into it, just typical like instructions of how to play, you know, the controls and what's involved. Now, as I said earlier, the game itself, it's like a 2D arcade racer. It's very, very similar to things like Outrun, Chase HQ in a way. There's no actual multiple choice path through the levels. It's entirely based around getting to the next checkpoint. There's nothing else beyond that. The view itself is behind the actual car, and the car does look absolutely fantastic. You know, it is a Lotus. You don't actually get to see the front of the car, sadly. But again, you look at the title screen, you get the badge there. So there's something for Lotus aficionados, I suppose. I'm not sure what else to say. It is your typical racing game in the sense that when you're playing, in the top left, you've got like your speed and your gears, depending on whether you're using automatic or manual. That there is a bar there, which is more, it indicates more if you're using manual because you need to time it right to get the speed right and stuff. Looks nice enough. Then up to the top right, you've got the score, the time remaining. You know, it's typical racer, and of course you've got your speed up there. So it's not like there's any dials or anything dotted around. There's no sort of like HUD or mini map on the screen whatsoever. Now the graphics themselves, I will say they're absolutely gorgeous, especially for the times. You've got like your marshes and forests and things like that, and hills and cities and things, and they're all very well drawn. They do look like they don't look like 8-bit type of graphics, very 16-bit, quite dense, quite packed, and there's lots of obstacles on the road. As you drive along, the roads do actually roll up and down as if you're going over hills. It's not all flat, which seems to be quite a common thing with racing games at the time. It's a bit cheap, really, because it's not that difficult to put something in there. And of course, the obstacles, you know, they're all over the side of the road. Simple things like trees and signs, you know, like turning corners, that sort of thing. But there's things like logs and hedges and water hazards, and the things with like the logs and the hedges, when you hit them, they effectively act like a ramp, so you do actually get some air and do actually take off. Now, you can't steer your car left and right and stuff. Once you hit a jump, you go straight off it. But in a lot of driving games, when you're going towards like a big hill and there's a height on it, once you hit the top of the hill, if you're going fast enough, a lot of time you will take off. Now, there's none of that in this. I mean, it doesn't really, I suppose it wouldn't really add anything to the game, but there were a couple of times and I was like really flying there at top speed and I thought, wouldn't it be great if you could just take off? But it's a car, it's not an airplane. What am I going on about? One of the things this game does really and really well is the sense of speed that it creates. When you are flying down the road and you're dodging in and out between things and going past other cars, the sense of speed is amazing, and it's probably the closest you'll get to probably looking like the 60 frame rate racing game that you'll get on modern consoles. I'm sure it's not up to that degree, but the speed of it, it's believable, it's fast, and the car handles well enough that you can always deal with situations that you're coming up on, and it really did impress me. Bear in mind, this is a game from 1991, and it moves at a fair old pace. Even with this really high speed and how quick it runs, I mean, it really does move at a fast clip. I didn't see any sort of slowdown, I didn't have any problems, and I tried it on a couple of settings, so I don't think it was down to, I just think it's how well it's been coded. It runs really, really quickly. Playing it on the multiplayer, and you'll see when you look at the video, did get a bit of slowdown, but to be honest, I think it was more like stuttering every so often, but that might have been down to poor connections on Amiga Live, because there was, you know, the two of us were playing it going across the internet, and most of the time it's okay, but every so often it would either just stutter and there'd be a slight bit of slowdown. I'm pretty sure that's not down to the game running on the Amiga. Now, it does run on a split screen when you run it that way, like half and half. Typical for these sort of racing games. You don't lose too much, but probably the biggest problem with that straight away is you can't really see too far off into the distance because it letterboxes it and really squishes it up. But again, this is something that's quite common and happens with these games all the time, especially from that era. There is really only one game mode to this, and it's going from checkpoint to checkpoint, a bit similar in style to Outrun in a way, and you get about 60 seconds, I believe, between each one. And when you get to the next checkpoint, it adds another up to 60 seconds. I think it depends on how much time. I think in some cases, I'm sure it was about 48 to 50. But anyway, so you're really, really moving at a really high speed. You're having to keep to the track as much as possible. Because if you do fall too far behind, that timer really will catch up with you, and if you're not there in time, there's no way you're beating it, and you just can't carry on. Again, it's your typical checkpoint-based play. The game really does have some fantastic music. It really, really did impress me, and one of the greatest things about it, and it's probably why the game is so popular, is like the opening music with it's like a voice sample, and he's going ooh ah, and like it's sort of singing over the top of it. It's very, 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 very simple, but it's used in such a good way, and it's almost like rapid drums and stuff. It really does drive you into draw you into the music. Now, every stage has its own music. I'm afraid you can only choose between having the music on or off. If it's off, you get sound effects. If it's on, you only get the music. I suppose it's down to personal taste and how you want to play it. I think I've said already that the controls are really, really responsive. The car has a lot of weight to it. You can feel it when you're driving, the way it slips around corners and responds to things. It controls really, really well, which is always a plus with this type of game. There is a choice, I think I said, between manual and automatic gears. Again, if you're really into manual, I think that adds a whole new element of gameplay because you're having to flick up and time it with the speed and stuff. You know, it's not just like driving a proper car, because when you're driving at speed, you really need to be quick on the ball. Where the automatic gears are often a lot easier. But the way this works is the game is quite difficult, I think. I mean, it really forces you to like learn the tracks and experience them properly, because as I said before, there's no sort of like mini map or HUD, so you're relying on the fact that you're coming up to corners, you're going around, you're going against the other drivers, you've got to get around as cleanly and quickly as possible and try not to lose too much time, and I think it does very, very well. But I found, maybe it's just me personally, that the manual gears and the accelerator gear, they're almost like two levels of difficulty, and I felt the manual was a lot more difficult than the automatic. I could focus on just the pure racing with the automatic, but going back to the manual, it really put that extra effort and a lot more stress in, and I enjoyed it both ways. So again, it's all down to personal preference. The track is filled with lots and lots of Lotus races. It's probably limitations of the time, but there's no other sort of cars or vehicles on the road. I mean, you know, it's Lotus Turbo Challenge, I suppose. It's what you expect. Because you're racing for checkpoints, though, it's not like you're trying to do in a proper race. You're trying to get in position. So there's not really favoritism with other cars or things. It's not like, say, with Road Rash, where you've got like a rival or something like that. Basically, once you've passed someone, you've gone. The cars are all, well, most of them, they're all sort of like different colours, but they're all the same. They're all the same model Lotus, and there's no way to change that, which is, I suppose, that's sort of a down one. When you're speeding along, most of the time there's a lot of objects at the side of the road, but when you hit things, there is like a satisfying thud as you bounce off to the side, but you tend not to lose like 3/4 of your speed or something crazy like a lot of other racing games tend to do. This really does, it's focused on the speed. You will lose a bit, but you can just put your foot down and catch up enough, and it works pretty well because it's all like really speed focused. The sound effects are pretty much top notch. One of the greatest things about this, and usually with these, with the sound effects for racing games, it can make or break them, because if you've got an awful like sound engine, or it just doesn't sound, you know, it's just off, or it's too tinny or something. But I'm happy to say it's perfect. You do have that mode where you can turn them off, I suppose, if they annoy you, but I thought this sounded really, really satisfying. The engine noise, I'm not actually sure if they captured that. They might possibly have done. Or I know with some games they like record hoovers and then push it through a filter and stuff, but the engine sound on this is really, really good. It's satisfying, and it's as it should be. And you like sliding and slipping around corners, you get all like proper decent skid noise. Like I said, that very satisfying funk when you do bounce off things. It all works very, very well. As I mentioned earlier, this does have weather effects. It's quite surprising just how good these actually are, and how they can affect like the car handling. You know, you've got things like fog and the snow and the rain, and these are all proper on the screen, and like the fog in particular, the cars disappear off in the distance and you can't see all of the track, and it makes you be a bit more cautious. Like with the rain, it's a lot more slippy, and the car does actually feel different. It feels a lot more slippy, especially in like the snow stages. It's really, really satisfying. It's great the way it works. And of course, no one else seemed to be doing this at the time. I suspect they were all trying, but I think Lotus Turbo Challenge 2 was pretty much the genre breaker for it at the time. By no means, though, is this game perfect. It does have I would say, a list of problems. Not really considerable ones, but a few issues which probably niggles in a way. But one of the biggest, and it's more of an annoyance really, but there's no sort of like mini map. There's nothing like, no like mini HUD or something on the screen. There's no way you can like tap a key or a button or anything just to flick to the map to work out where you are on the course. If you play something like Outrun, when you've done your race, it'll show you afterwards that, you know, you got so far on the track. There's absolutely nothing like that on this, and I think it does remove a bit from the game, because you're focusing on getting from checkpoint to checkpoint. To me, they felt a bit, especially after a good distance, they just felt a bit pointless, because you just think, oh, well, I'm literally this checkpoint to that checkpoint. I just stick within this, it's 60 seconds, and you lose a sense of where you actually are. And I think it would have been very easy to put something in, but, well, it just wasn't to be, so what can you say? The other problem I had with it, and this is probably a major issue, is there's no sort of like challenge modes or race mode or track or anything like that. You're entirely focused on that outrun style checkpoint racing. There's nothing in the options. The option screen itself is pretty limited. Now, of course, it does have lots of different track types. Probably the best to me that really stood out, forgetting about the weather effects for the minute, was that the night track still looked really great. It's very dark. You know, you can sort of see the road up close as you would expect. The sun's sort of going off down in the distance, and there's all like the night sky and the city's lit up and stuff, which is great. That's absolutely fantastic. But what I was expecting automatically when I see things like that, it was a bit like an episode I did ages ago was Nitro. And in the night sections, you've actually got lights coming out of the front of the car. And yeah, it's not necessary, it doesn't really do anything, but it looks good. And it's very jarring, I felt, on the night stages that there's just nothing like that. And it wouldn't have just, even if they'd just drawn a couple of circles or something in front of the car or the other cars and so on, you know, it really would have made all that difference. It would have just made that tracker it feel more alive and a lot different, because to me it just feels very odd to be driving around at night with no lights on a car. But that's just me as a car driver. Maybe normal people just who don't drive just don't think of that at all, but it did feel very odd. Now the game as a whole it's incredibly basic. There's nothing on the option screen. It's literally just a checkpoint racer. You got things like the link play, the 2-player, you can select the type of gears, you know, controls between joystick and mouse, but that's as far as it goes. And there's the password selection, but that's nice and simple. It's a simple level. There's only 8 stages, so you know, you get to each one, you go through an area, you move on to the next, and the password lets you select the stages. But that's pretty much it. In some of I never said this before, but in some of the later stages, you can actually get like a turbo boost, which moves you at speed. And that's quite impressive. That really does go flying along. But I think there's also a timer. Sorry, there's oh God. It's right towards the end. There is a time boost. You can actually collect like the little pellets, but they're very few and far between. And just maybe there should have been more. I just don't know. One of the biggest things as well, I suppose, is there's no damage to the actual car. Yeah, it's satisfying to bounce off things and really work your way around the track, but, and I know this is down to the license, I really like to see it be like the Outrun Ferrari, where it's rolling and spinning in the air. That's the thing, is like Ferrari were quite happy, I'm sure, to have their car damaged and stuff, because it's only a game. And yeah, you had people being flung out of the car and through the air of this convertible, but it just made it that bit more exciting and a lot more tense, because you had to be careful. You couldn't just like slam into a wall and then just foot off and bounce away. And because there's no sort of damage, it's just like, it just takes away a bit of the realism. I suppose that's a bit an odd thing to say for an arcade racer. Now I was using this with WHD load, but I always do my usual. I try loading it off the floppy disks, and my God, the loading times were horrendous. And I get why, because it's on like a single floppy, and it's probably loading like the music and graphics and things, but it seemed to take absolutely ages. And from what I could see, there was a lot of reviews and people commenting on different websites and forums and stuff, and saying, you know, the load times are horrendous. But again, this is 91, so maybe they just really weren't into disk compression, or it was maybe a bit of poor coding around that part, which is a shame, because the rest of the game is so good. In fact, there's probably, because there's so much goodness in that game, it just can't load it all at once. It takes ages. Now, for the time, this was rated extremely highly, pretty much across every magazine going. Amiga Action gave it 95% on launch, CU Amiga at 94%, The One 93%, Amiga Computing 91%, Amiga format 89, and probably a surprise, but was Amiga power at 87%. Now they tend to mark a lot of games down a fair bit, and reading through the review, I mean, they sort of mentioned a few of the niggles I've brought up, but it seems strange that they would mark it so highly, and then a year or so later, when the re-release of the game came out and the price dropped to about $9.99, they then marked it down to 62%, and one of their biggest complaints seemed to be like there's much better games and it's okay, I suppose, and we were very impressed with it when it came out, but going back to it now, and you just think, well, to be fair on it, that seems very strange to mark a game so highly and then slash off like almost 30% of the score a bit later because you think you might have changed your mind or it's not. It just seemed a bit odder. A review should be able to stand by itself. But then again, I suppose it's a person's personal preference in it really and what they think about it. Overall though, those scores are pretty understandable. It really is something special. I can understand because with all the effects and things going on and the way it looks and the music, it really does feel like a premium game for the Amiga, and I can understand why it was so groundbreaking and it just blew everyone away. I mean, especially 1990, 91, the closer you would probably get to this is like Chase HQ and of course Outrun. But this is just on a whole other level. It's just something off to the side. Of course, it does have its problems. The biggest one I felt is just like the lack of the modes or the racing. It's pure checkpoint racing, and it just needs that little bit more to do. Oh, sorry, a lot more to do. It could have done with some sort of racing or improvements in there. But the great thing about it is that the core game, the driving, the mechanics, the way it responds, the way the races go, and the other drivers, it's not. This is a proper premium game. I've said that before, but the core gameplay really is fantastic. I mean, the speed is just amazing. I mean, I sat there and I'd not really played this properly, and it's before I'd done any sort of footage with Dan, and I was just looking at it, I just think, my God, is this real? Have I got have I got like the graphics card setting on the emulator set wrong? Because it was moving so quickly, and none of the other games have really had this sort of speed before, and it blew me away. Of course, the tracks are great as well. I appreciate the way, especially in the double play. So I was playing it with Dan. I had not learnt the tracks at the time we were doing the video, but as we were playing it and the levels went further and further and we kept coming back on, I was just picking them up naturally and I was getting better and better. And I think, the more time you sink into this, the better the game becomes, and it really does become like a really awesome driving experience. The lack of a mini-map, I think that's its biggest problem really. I think that really does hurt it, because I like to see where we are on it going up to the next checkpoint, how far there is to go, and there is some indication between distance on the 2-player mode, but there isn't on the single, and it just it's a niggle which becomes something bigger if you try to come up with problems for it. That's just me though. That's just me. You can really tell though that it takes full advantage of what the Amiga is, what it could do. It feels like it's pushing the system, especially for 91. It feels like it's pushing it to its limits, especially with that music. That music is absolutely fantastic. I went to look up the soundtrack. You think a single floppy disk, a few tunes, and it's not going to be that long, is it? But there's a good 15 minutes worth of music, which is quite impressive for an Amiga game, and your average track's like 2 to 3 minutes long, and of course the looped and stuff. But again, this is a single floppy, and there's so much music. You've got voice samples in there, and it's not just simple remix. Every single track has got a different music track on, and it really does make it a fantastic racer. So yeah, I mean, it looks great, it sounds good, it plays fantastically well. It just needs some more choices and more stuff to do. Again, it got its niggles, but at the end of the day, I think this is a great game. I had awesome fun with it, and I think it's something that I will be returning to in future. And that, I think, is as good a point as any to finish the show. As always, guys, thanks for listening. If you want to leave any comments or questions, or even just have a look at what I'm doing, you can come over to AMIGArama.com. We've got Twitter accounts, Facebook, email accounts, everything's coming out of my ears over there, and I'm actually looking forward to hear you guys. Of course, we do have a Discord account. I put that address for that into the description for the show notes. I'm quite active on there. I do quite chat with quite a few people, and it's great to get involved because it also gives me ideas for other shows, and of course some of these shows will be coming too soon. Anyway, until next time, guys.